Okay, we're back for part two. And we were talking about the Ottawa Senators and how Terrace Investments Limited, the first parent company of the Ottawa Senators, how it grew and developed and changed and got ready to make a bid for a National Hockey League team. So in 1987, when I was trying to decide whether I would go the public storage route or I would buy, a large piece of land on a major highway and try and put an NHL franchise together, an NHL caliber arena, and a whole community around it, I was hanging, do I go left or do I go right? And who said when you get to a fork in the road, take it? Well, that's where I was at. So the first question that Cyril Leader asked me, and he's a CA, chartered accountant, when I told him I was thinking about bringing back the Ottawa Senators, he said, "Well, how much will it cost, Bruce?" And based on NBA franchise values at the time, I said, "I think around 35 million. The actual price was 50. Today, with the Las Vegas Knights, it would be 500 million, but 25 years ago, it was 1/10 as much." Um, And Randy Sexton, who's a hockey guy from Clarkson University and an MBA, said, "Yeah, let's do it." And Cyril said, again, cautious, "How will we pay for it?" I said, "Well, we could bootstrap it." Now, how would that work? So let's see if I can get it to change. All right. Well, I said, what if we bought 600 acres at $12,500 an acre, put an NHL team in an NHL caliber arena in the middle of it, drive up the value of the land to 112,000, keep 100 acres for Scotiabank Place, which is now Canadian Tire Center, and sell the extra 500 acres at a profit of 100,000 an acre. That works, right? It's $50 million. So we could get our NHL franchise for zero cost. So that was the theory. Good theory, right? And I also believe in sponsorship. And sponsorship is not just something you use when you're going to try and acquire a major league sports team. You can do that in a whole lot of different venues and arenas and industries. It's something that more and more companies should be using, and especially co-branding. But that's another subject. So we got 32 original corporate sponsors, people like the Royal Bank of Canada and Bell Canada, each chipped in $15,000. We had 500 corporate sponsors who chipped in 500, and we sold 15,000 PRNs, priority registration numbers. People got a number for which they paid $25 for a team that didn't exist. All right, so season tickets basically. So we raised just over 1.1 million to help with the bid, and like Al Davis once said, God rest his soul, just win, baby. So there you go. That's what we were focused on. So that helped us a little bit. Some of the lessons I was learning through the 80s and 90s: when something isn't working, stop doing it, do something new. Always learn from your competitors. If you have no commitment, you'll have no business. You've got to be committed. Your head has to be in it, your heart and your gut. And you can bootstrap big projects. Even large companies do it. When Disney, a few years after we acquired the Ottawa Senators, bought the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, now just called the Ducks, they bought it for $50 million. But it didn't actually cost them $50 million. They had, I think, $25 million of company debt that they put on the franchise, so 25 million. They got a $20 million leasing inducement from Ogden Corporation, which had just built a new building in Orange County with no tenant. So they paid $20 million to Disney to come and sign a lease with them. So now you're at $45 million. And then half of the franchise fee for Disney went to Bruce McNall and the LA Kings because they were infringing on their territory. And Disney negotiated paying that off at $5 million a year. So their actual cost to buy the franchise in their first year was $30 million. And if you think about it, they ended up getting about $45 million in financing. So they actually had more cash on hand after they bought the Ducks than they did beforehand. This is called accretive deal making. And I've done this over and over. And again, you don't have to be the size of Disney and scale of Disney to do it. So sponsorship is a form of bootstrap capital. Some of the other things I learned from my involvement with the Sens: find out what you're good at and do that, and outsource everything else. With the Sens, what we needed to do was sell season tickets, have great relations with our sponsors, build a successful hockey program, but things like parking and cleaning and food and beverage and all kinds of other things, we outsourced that. We had people who are much better at it than we are. Do it. And if you're profitable, you'll get financing, not the other way around. I really don't believe in business models which say, don't worry about, getting to profitability, we just find people who are willing to write big checks for long periods of time. In the United States, it's a little bit different. Okay, you can be Uber or you can be Facebook, and you can get a long runway by people willing to put billions of dollars of cash into it, hoping that one day you will in fact be profitable. But in most other countries around the world, profitability and early profitability is very important. And of course, entrepreneurs, we make our own rules. It takes guts, and I've said over and over again in this two-part video capture that I'm doing that you have to be prepared to put in the work. Sweat equity is very important, and I think creativity and innovation and differentiation are also key variables. Sometimes I prefer build and hold, but if you remember from part one, I did lots of trading because you need to get table stakes. I don't like competing with large competitors head on because they can often beat you just because they have better financing. And I think it's very important to be trustworthy. So your suppliers, your employees, your customers, your clients, everybody, all your stakeholders trust you. Surround yourself by a competent, trusted team. That, I think Warren Buffett said, other than starting your business, the next most important decision you make is who's on the bus with you. And I think that's right. And of course, you've heard this one, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And my dad used to say, let 100 opportunities go by, but when the right one comes along, strike and make a profit. While I was getting ready to do the Sens deal, I was doing some other things. This is Robertson Mews, which was townhouses, single families, condos, stacked towns, you name it. We even had a retirement residence. I like those kind of mixed communities. This was one I built in a rural area. Kind of see Dunrobin Lake over here at the corner, but this is the trails of Dunrobin. There's a plaza there. Blue Heron Storage Corp, which I talked about in part one, was over here, and then we did some more houses over here in Casey Creek. Doesn't look like much, but I'm proud of it, and it's been a very successful place. This is Dunrobin Lake. I removed 1.1 tons of sand, sold it, and then ended up with a beautiful spring-fed lake, and we developed a subdivision around that as an after use. I made it a walkable community, believe it or not. This is out in the rural area, by adding a plaza here, and everybody said, "Oh, you're crazy! You know, it makes no sense. You got a plaza in a little tiny village like this. It'll never work." But pretty much from day one, it's been successful. It's got a very successful meat shop here. I think Canada Post is there. This is a pizza restaurant. And right now, I think there's a couple more plazas that are going to be built here. What did I see? Well, I saw this has my calling card. It's kind of, you know, the feature that you could walk there and get a, you know, a popsicle, or your kids could get a popsicle and you could get a liter of milk. But I also knew that there were 7,000 or 8,000 cars a day going by here on this road, and you know, there was no place to shop, and so it has been, it's not big, but it's been very successful. I was also doing lots of other subdivisions. This is one in Canada with hundreds and hundreds of homes and commercial development. This is Brybrook, and I talked in part one about the Brook Street Hotel. That was one of Mr. Matthews' developments in the marshes. That's on the land that we used to own back here that we bought very inexpensively. I was building office buildings. I think this is one of the largest sloped glass buildings in Eastern Ontario, maybe the largest. I built that one. I built the Royal Bank Pavilion and many other buildings. And of course, I'm best known for this building where the Sens, in fact, are playing today in a few minutes. Here's a story I like to tell. This is what's called the Aberdeen Pavilion. And you can see it in, it was in a beautiful building really, but in tremendous distress, you know, mainly a home for pigeons, broken windows, pigeon poop all over it. It was fading fast, and it looked like it was at the end of its economic life. It was built in the 1890s. It's literally a Meccano set. It's got about an acre of space under this extraordinary structure with no columns, so column-free space. And the city of Ottawa in the 90s decided that it was too expensive to renovate it, so they decided they were going to demolish it, and they voted, the city of Ottawa's council voted to demolish the building, and they were going to pay $350,000 to demolish it. So I called up the mayor of the time. Her name was Jackie Holtzman. I said, Ms. Holtzman, Mayor, what are you going to do with this building? Well, she says, you know, council has decided to tear it down. It's a shame. You know, it's a heritage building, but it's got to go. And I said, what if I save the city $350,000? She said, what do you mean? I said, I am prepared to send a crew to the city, to Lansdowne Park, which is right in the center of the city. We are going to take it apart because it's just a big mechanical set, piece by piece. We'll number and letter it, and we're going to rebuild it right next to this building. So can you imagine what it would be like to have, sort of new architecture with old architecture? And this would give us almost an acre of exhibition space under a roof. And she said, that'd be marvelous. Would you charge us anything for it? Absolutely not. I'll save the city $350,000 demolition, and I'll just take it away and I'll rebuild it. So we'll still have the building. She said, that's great. Would you write me a letter? So I did. I sent her the letter, and she tables it with council 2 weeks later. And the next day, I get the worst press coverage. Firestone's trying to steal heritage building from the city, and I was the bad guy in all of this. I said, whoa, I'm just trying to save this beautiful building. So council decided to reverse itself and spend $5.5 million repairing and renovating this building. So it's still at Lansdowne Park. It's a treasured part of our heritage, and this is what it looks like today. Right? Pretty cool. But that would have been neat right next to Canadian Tire Centre, for sure. So I feel that I'm the hero in this piece, but I think a lot of the media at the time felt that I was going to be a big zero. Anyway, there you go. One of the things that we liked about the name the Ottawa Senators is that the Sens did win 9 Stanley Cups. In other words, they played in the National Hockey League from the 1890s until 1933, and during the Great Depression, they just couldn't make a go of it, so they moved to St. Louis, I think, in 33, but in 34, they folded. So that was the end of the Ottawa Senators in the old era, and what you can see here is we've got some of the teams from those eras. Here's Frank Finnegan, who is still alive when we were trying to bring the team back. Here's, I think, our first expansion draft pick, which was Alexei Yashin, a really fine Russian player. That was our first coach. This is me as a young man, Cyril Leader, Randy Sexton, Jimmy Steele, and of course some of the first-year players. So this is an original piece of art that was given to me, and it sort of combined the old with the new. So that's what we did. This is a picture of the 92-93 Senators. Here's me as a young man. Rod Bryden on my right, Randy Sexton on his right, Mel Bridgman first general manager. There's Rick Bowness, first-year coach, Cyril Leader. And this is kind of neat. Cyril Leader ran the Ottawa Senators right up until a few months ago. And Bernie Ash was his right-hand man back in the day. But now Bernie is running OSEG, Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group, which runs the Red Blacks, the Ottawa 67s, and Lansdowne Park. So at that time, they were then colleagues and then later became competitors. And what happened after that was our first year the team had $6.5 million a year salaries. So we had $6.5 million Canadian dollars. That was our salary budget for the big and little team in our first year, 92-93. And we actually made money running the NHL team. We had EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization of nearly $10 million. And just a very few years later, player salaries went wild and went to $54 million US dollars, and the Canadian dollar went from about 90 cents to about 62 cents. So you could imagine if you try that in your own business, it's probably not going to work. So the Sens went bankrupt in 2004, 2005, and I had to find a new career, right? So I did some teaching. This is me in Stockholm. I was teaching at Hyper Island. I got a chance to write some books. This is the first of a trilogy, Quantum Entity. It's a kind of a sci-fi thriller. It was made into a movie. I wrote the Real Estate Handbook. And you know how I got involved in it, right? I just simply asked, what does Toronto have that Ottawa doesn't? And I thought about the zoo, and I thought about the Princess of Wales Theatre, and then, of course, I realized they had the Maple Leafs. So I had that discussion with Randy and Cyril and went through the same thing that I talked about earlier. Let's do it. How much is it going to cost? And I came up with a simple plan. So here's a little bit more detail on that. So the idea was to put the Palladium, now called Canadian Tire Centre, right here, and then develop the lands around it, drive up the value, and hopefully make some money and live happily ever after. So it was kind of a mixed-use community. So I think all of the pink areas are retail. Yeah, retail, that's so lots of shopping. The yellow up here is high density residential, more shopping here. linear park here along the Carp River, a big square, which would be kind of where you could celebrate, hopefully, a Stanley Cup. One day, I think this blue stuff is, or gray stuff is office, and then all this stuff is industrial here. So it was kind of a mixed use mini town that we wanted to build. So the idea was to keep 100 acres and sell the other 500 acres, take the balance of the money, put it in trucks that look like this, take the $50 million down, and give it to John Ziegler, who was president of the National Hockey League, and get an NHL franchise. That was the theory. Now, why is it in Canada? I get asked this until I'm blue in the face. Well, I'll tell you why. This is a picture of Jean Piggott. She was the chair of the NCC, the National Capital Commission. And I went to see Mrs. Piggott, and I said, Mrs. Piggott, could we put it on LeBreton Flats? Could we put our new building down there? And Jean was a lovely lady. She's passed away now. And she said to me, Bruce, do you want the private answer or the public answer? I said, are they different? And she said, yes, they are. The private answer is no. LeBreton Flats is a very important piece of land owned by the Government of Canada. It's very close to the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. And she said, we have a 150-year plan for those lands. We're going to put major institutions, maybe a new Supreme Court of Canada building, new museums. So the answer is no. I'm sure you're going to build a nice rink, but to us at the NCC, it's just a rink. So I said, Jean, what's the public answer? Well, she said, the public answer, if you ask me publicly, we never like to say no to Canadian citizens. So what we'll say instead is we'll study it. We'll study it until one of two things happens, Bruce. You give up and go away, or B, you die. Whichever comes first, and frankly, we don't care. All right, so I told you about all the corporate sponsorship that we did, selling our season tickets before we got the team. But then we did some other deals. We sold the arena management rights for 30 years, the food and beverage rights, our media rights, radio, television, the pouring rights. Pouring rights means the right to pour beer in this thing. And we also did some very important pre-leasing. We have about 140 private suites in Canadian Tire Center. We pre-leased 100 of them at $100,000 a year for 10 years up front. So think about that. 100 suites at 100,000 for 10 years. So it's 100 times 100 times 10. It's a lot of money. It's $100 million. So we had a lot of pre-committed revenues. This is very important for our financing. We did a great job, I think, in Palm Beach in 1990. In December of 1990, we went down there. We had a huge group. You can see it on the right here of people. I think 120 people came down to, support us. This is Frank Finnegan, who scored a goal in the last time the Sens won the Stanley Cup, which was 1927. And he came with us as well to Palm Beach. And he told Mr. Ziegler, the president at the time of the NHL, Mr. Ziegler, you be sure to give those boys in Ottawa a fair chance. And Mr. Ziegler certainly listened. We were up against some tough competitors. We were up against Hamilton. This is Ron Joyce, the donut guy. He owned at one time the Tim Hortons franchise, so he was representing Hamilton. We were up against Hamilton, Milwaukee, Seattle, Portland, Houston. Did I say Seattle? I think I did. Tampa, St. Petersburg. There were a lot of tough competitors down there, including Ron and Hamilton. And the night before we actually got the team, one of the members of the Board of Governors said to me, Bruce, I just want to say one thing. I said, yes, sir. What is that? You will never, ever, ever get an NHL franchise in Ottawa. And then you can see a picture. This is a picture of me right after he told me that. Imagine we'd spent 3, 4, 5 years of our lives on this. We'd spent a lot of money buying land and doing the bid and all the other stuff that we were involved with. And here's one of the voters the night before they're going to vote saying you're never going to get a franchise. That was a pretty tough moment. But still, we kept going. We kept campaigning and lobbying. And maybe that was one vote we weren't going to get. But there you go. The next day, there was an announcement by the NHL, and the two successful bidders were, in fact, Ottawa and Tampa. So the Senators and the Tampa Bay Lightning came in, and the Lightning were represented by this guy. For older people who like the NHL, they'll certainly recognize him as Phil Esposito, a wonderful player in the NHL, and certainly a man who would never be discouraged by, by anything. He was just indomitable. So Phil won, and I did as well. And there's a little bit of a story to that, and I'll tell you that in a second. So here it is, a few minutes after the announcement. This is me on the left with John Ziegler here. And on the other side, you can't really see him. I cut off Phil Esposito, but on the other side is Phil with his arm raised too. About 3 weeks or 4 weeks after we got the franchise back in Ottawa, doing all the things we needed to do over the next 2 years to get ready to ice a team, and I get a call from that member of the Board of Governors who said, "You will never, ever, ever get a franchise for Ottawa." And he said, "Bruce, do you remember that comment I made?" I said, "I most certainly do. I'll remember it the rest of my life." So I want to tell you what we did. Me and 3 of the other guys on the board got together, and we went up to every single bidder. Hamilton, Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg, Houston, Seattle, Milwaukee, etc. And we said the same thing. You will never, ever, ever get a franchise in, put the city's name in. Because we wanted to see who would be discouraged and who would continue to lobby and move forward. And the only 2 who didn't get mad and who kept working were you and Phil, and that's who we gave franchises to. So franchises don't actually go to cities. They go to people that the National Hockey League, and it's the same is true for the National Football League and for Major League Baseball, they go to people that they like and trust. And if you're doing any kind of sales, likability and trustability, I think trustability is a word, are really important. But then suddenly something went terribly wrong. I came back to Ottawa, and this guy was in power. Some of you may know who it is. Oh, it's right there at the top of the screen, Bob Rae. He was the Premier of the province of Ontario, and he had a lot of political support in Hamilton. He really wanted the franchise to go to Hamilton. So he and his government decided to oppose the rezoning of what is now called Canadian Tire Centre. This was a big problem for us. We had to go through a 13-and-a-half-week Ontario Municipal Board hearing against our own government. And I remember Phil calling me up and saying he was super excited. He got a call from the governor of the state of Florida saying, "Welcome, Phil. We're so glad to have the National League come to Florida." This is before the Florida Panthers and before the Tampa Bay Rays and all this other cool stuff that happened later. And he said, "How was your reaction when you got back to Ontario?" I said, "Not quite the same, Phil. We got a lawsuit from our government." So what happened was the OMB approved the 100-acre Palladium zoning, which was good. I was on the stand for 3.5 days. And it was tough cross-examination by the Ontario government and their lawyer, but we persevered. But the balance of the lands remained in limbo, and Terrace Investments had to write down $80 million worth of land inventory, and we also had to pay for our own interchange. Still to this day, I think the only privately funded interchange in Ontario on a 400 series highway. So I knew at that time, my career as an NHL owner was probably going to come to an end, but we did manage to raise enough money to build the building and to ice a team, and we got it done. But it left the team with so much debt that by 2004, 2005, as I said earlier, the team went bankrupt, and of course I had to find a new career. And it was a tough time in many ways in the early 90s. We were losing teams. This is Barry Shankerl. We were losing the Winnipeg Jets. They went south. And we were losing the Quebec Nordiques, which was a terrible loss, I think, both of these franchises. These guys went to Colorado, to Denver. And Quebec still doesn't have a team, although the Jets are now back in Winnipeg. And then, of course, Bruce McNall and the LA Kings were having their own issues. I think Bruce unfortunately went to jail because of his some issues with his lenders. So anyway, I'm certainly supporting, and I hope to see one day another team in Quebec. We see one in Las Vegas now, starting I think in 2018, and I'm hoping one day soon to be joined by a team in Quebec. This is their new arena in Quebec City. It's a beautiful building. It'd be nice to see something done in Hamilton too. I certainly would support that. And, listen, the NHL says there's no veto, but, if Bruce McNall had not approved the Disney company and the Ducks coming into Orange County in his territory, I'm sure the other owners would have respected his wishes, just as they would respect Toronto or Buffalo if they don't want Hamilton. So I think it's anybody trying to get a team in Hamilton, they should probably make a deal first with both Buffalo and Toronto. Oh, there were some great moments. This was one of my favorite. This is the very first goal scored by Neil Brady in the first game of the Senators in the modern era. I think that's October 6, 1992. Actually, the Canadians would go on to win the Stanley Cup that year. That's the last Canadian team to actually win a Stanley Cup. That's 92-93. But here's Neil Brady on the opening night scoring the very first goal. That was a magic moment. They actually beat the Sens 5-3, but I don't think they won another game for a month. And here's the record for the team. It was pretty horrible. The first year record, 10 wins and 70 losses and 4 ties. So it was pretty tough first year. And I constantly had to remind people, look, you can't win the Stanley Cup every year. And if you don't win the Stanley Cup, really everyone else is a loser. Does it really matter if you're second in the league or third or for that matter, last? It would be better to be first, but other than that, nobody remembers. However, there was one thing I did say. I said to our team, I went into the dressing room on opening night, and I said, guys, we've got to get at least 22 points this year. Hopefully a lot more, but not less than 22. And the guy said, why, Mr. Firestone? And I said, because the worst ever team in the NHL was the Washington Capitals in 74, 75. They got 21. And trust me, you guys do not want to be, you'll live with that label. If you played on that team in 74, 75, that label will follow you into your grave. And the Capitals are, praying that somebody will come along and be worse than they were. So, in fact, we got 24 points, so we steered clear of that fate. What happened April 12th, 1997? I don't really remember. Oh, now I do. This goal. Steve Duchesne, he scored from Alexei Yashin in the last game of the year to put the Sens into the playoffs for the first time. So we actually had a plan when we got the team, 92-93, we said we'll make the playoffs in our first, somewhere after year 4 or 5, and we'll challenge for a Stanley Cup in 7-12. And this was the goal. Last game of the year, it was win and in, lose and go home. And Steve Duchesne had to put a perfect shot past the best goalie, maybe the best goalie ever to play in Dominic Hasek. And with a few minutes remaining, I remember my mother saying, have faith, Bruce. They're going to score. I know they're going to score. Oh, Mom, I hope so. I hope so. And they did, and the place went wild. It was a great moment for me. The next one that I remember as being one of my highlights is when Daniel Alfredson, the captain of the time, scored the goal to put the Sens into the Stanley Cup final for the first time. They still haven't won a Stanley Cup, but there's always hope, right? Not even sure what this is. Oh yeah, the hamburger. That was another one of my favorite. I think the Sens did something no other team has done. They were way, 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 way behind, and then this goalie out of nowhere comes along. They called him the hamburger for stealing wins, and he got the Sens to the playoffs. So that was a pretty cool run. But it's really tough to win a Stanley Cup. It might be the hardest trophy to win in all of sports, and I'm hoping that without the Earth traveling around the sun too many more times, because I am 65 now, that the Sens will win a cup before I get too much older. And if you look at how many Stanley Cups have been won by Canadian teams, if you look at all the Stanley Cups, I think it's around 76 or 77% by U.S. teams and 23%, but none by Canadian teams in the last 25 years. That's a long time. Americans are really doing a better job of running their teams, and they're building more competitive teams, both at the management level and obviously on the ice. So Canadian clubs have to get better. Why are we having so much trouble? I'm not sure if I actually have the answer, but maybe it's the weak Canadian dollar is affecting the economic viability of these franchises. Maybe some free agents don't like the media circus that hockey is involved with in Canada. They don't like the winter maybe in Winnipeg or Edmonton, or for that matter, Ottawa. I don't know. Maybe they don't like the tax regime in Quebec. But whatever it is, we've got to find a way to do better, because 0 Stanley Cups in 25 years is way too long. Last year, I think not a single Canadian team even made the playoffs. America is an amazing place. Ask any American, he or she will tell you that. But it is a winner-take-all society, and they tend to have tougher owners and tougher managers, and you need that. And Canadians, if we're going to compete with Americans, not just in hockey, but in terms of trade, in terms of venture capital, we need to get tougher, I think, as a whole. This is a picture of Bill Wirtz. He's now passed away, but Mr. Wirtz told me the most important thing about running a National Hockey League team was selling your season tickets. He said everything else will come. Bill owned the Chicago Blackhawks, and filling your building, whether you're in Canada or the United States, any NHL team, is really important. Sponsors want to be associated with winners, and winners have packed arenas. People ask me what will happen if the Sens leave Canada and move downtown to LeBron Flats, because that is now a possibility. Certainly that is something I think I would support. And I say, don't worry about Canada. Don't worry about Canadian Tire Centre. They could do what was done in Toronto. This is Old Maple Leaf Gardens, which has been repurposed now as a Loblaw superstore. It also has Mattamy Athletic Center and Ryerson University in part of the building. Very successful repurposing. And I think Canadian Tire Centre could be turned into 2 or 3 or more big box stores and be very successful. So what I have to say, and this is kind of from Yoda, I think, push your boundaries. Do or do not. There is no try. If you're an entrepreneur, you've got to be successful, and if something's not working, you've got to stop doing it, and you've got to find something that you're good at, you're passionate about, your head is in it, your heart's in it, your gut supports it, your instincts are all in alignment so you can be successful. Push yourself. I did write a story last year. Actually, I released it, I think, in December of 2015, so now about 15 or 16 months ago, called Don't Back Down, the real story of the founding of the NHL's Ottawa Senators. And I could certainly make a copy available to you, or you can find it on my website, brucemfirestone.com. And this website's going to change, but you'll always be able to find brucemfirestone.com. So if you really would like a copy of it, there's a lot of real estate in it, but there's a lot of hockey and a lot of sports. I do some keynote speaking, so if you have an organization that wants somebody to come and speak about entrepreneurship, about real estate, about urban development, business models, how to get your local economy going, that would be me. And I really love this. I do some professional coaching now, mostly real estate investment coaching, but some business coaching. And this has been a great success for me. And I think it has been future shaping and life-changing for a lot of people that I coach. So if you're interested in that, I'm not expensive and I'm really good at it. So if you want some professional coaching, that would be me. And people ask me, what am I doing today? So this is me on the left of your screen, and this is my wife, Dawn. I don't know why she puts up with me, but she does. So I'll just show you what we're going to do. We're going to do a little project. I call it Burning Rock. It's in Dunrobin. Remember I like Dunrobin. That's a little village in the west end of Ottawa. And if you think about my last name, Firestone, you'll understand why we're calling it Burning Rock. And here's a barn I built actually, I think in the mid-90s. Once I was kind of bored, I built this barn. It's actually kind of a cool place. It's got a little pond, as you can see in front. And it's near Dunrobin Lake. And I even found the old plans for it. It's pretty big. It's like 4,000 square feet. It's got clear ceiling height, which I think you can see. It's got a loft in there too. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn the barn. We're going to buy it back hopefully this month. We're going to turn it into a meeting place and a coaching place. So if you wanted some coaching and you're here in Ottawa, I can do that. If not, I can always meet you on Zoom or Skype or Google Hangout, and we'll build a little house next door as well. This was the barn when it was being built. It was really a play area for my kids, but it's got a nice slab. It's got that loft I mentioned, clear height, and it's got a cable across here which cinches its waist so it doesn't actually sag. And we're going to turn it into quite a nice spot. Here are two of my little girls. I got 3 daughters and 2 sons. Here are Mimi and Jess when they were little, playing at the lake. This is Dunrobin Lake, and it's got the island is there. We've got a little piece of land here with a cabin on it, and this is the land with the barn that we're going to reacquire hopefully this month. This was the lake as we were building it, so we took out all the sand. And this is what it looks like today. Spring-fed, beautiful water, and we've got houses there everywhere from $300,000 or $400,000 to a couple of $1 million. There's another picture for you. This is the house that we're going to build next to the barn. It's kind of, you can see that there's kind of a story behind it, barn story. And I want to thank you again for putting up with this rather long both introduction to how I got started in real estate and then what happened and now what's, so life goes up and down. I hope your life only goes up, but One of the things I would say to you, and I've said it to myself, I'll say it to you, if bad things happen to good people, I tell you, you have 3 days. The first day you can be sad. The second day you're allowed to be mad. But the third day you get up, you dust yourself off, get a little bit of exercise, get on with the rest of your life. If you'd like any help with real estate or business or coaching or entrepreneurship, you can always find me on Twitter at Prof. Bruce. You can see my cell number. Text me at any time. I respond to text really well. I respond to email, bruce.firestone at century21.ca. And you can see my blog there. Lots of stuff on my blog, profbruce.tumblr.com, and there's my website. So again, thank you very much for listening.